The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The webinar will begin shortly. Please remain on the line. The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome back to today's edition, July's edition of Payroll Question Time. This is our summer edition because we don't have an August episode. We won't be back until the end of September. So I hope we're going to cover an awful lot of information today. We're going to talk about work-life balance. We're going to talk about holidays. We're going to talk about all the things that we know you've been asking us to ask as well. So please do, if you have any questions today during the live show, put them in our questions box. I will ask our panel in real time. It doesn't have to be related to the things we talk about today. So if there's a particular challenge you're faced within your payroll department at the moment and you need a little bit of help, we've got an expert panel here to guide you through whatever those questions might be. So do put them in the questions panel during the course of the show, and I'll get to as many of those as I can. Quick mention, because we're not here in August, make sure if you haven't already that you've gone to the CIPP website and got your National Payroll Week download pack so you can celebrate the profession in style. National Payroll Week is the 4th to the 8th of September. So we will next be meeting after that's taken place. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to remind everyone to celebrate the profession, raise the profile, get your packs, and everyone gets celebrating the world of payroll. We'll do our best to celebrate it as much as we can today during today's discussions as well. And of course, it's been particularly good for me to celebrate it in style with some really challenging questions that you can put in that question box for me so I can give it to the panel. That's my kind of style of entertainment. So please do put those questions in the box, which for me is that way. Anyway. In addition to questions, we're going to be running 3 polls today, so that'll be your opportunity to get involved in today's show. So please do keep your fingers at the ready when that comes through. We'd love to hear your responses, and we will be commentating on the results as well. So that'll just make sure that everyone is still paying attention, and there'll be 3 of those during the course of the show. We will, of course, be recording today's episode, so you don't need to be writing notes and scribbling away. We'll send you a copy of the slides after the recording session is over. So you'll have a copy of those in your inbox. And along with that will be a survey. Now that survey is really, really, really important. It's that survey that allows us to decide what we're going to talk about in our next session, which will be in September on the 28th. So please do fill that in. Let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll do our ever best to make sure that happens. Lastly, but by no means least, I'm going to read out a quick legal disclaimer, which says the presentation does not provide definitive answers to individual queries, and in some places takes views on matters which are uncertain. It is not intended to be relied upon in any specific context or as a substitute for seeking advice, legal or otherwise, on a specific circumstances. Each case may be different. Now, I've got lots to get through today, so I'm going to give you a really quick introduction as to who I am. I'm the host of the Payroll Podcast. I'm a Award 300 member, and I'm CEO of JGA Recruitment Group, a specialist payroll recruitment firm, and I'm the host of this wonderful show. I'm going to quickly introduce you to our panel, starting from my left to right, Mr. Richard George.
Yep, good afternoon. Hope everybody's well. Richard George, Director of Education at the Payroll Centre. Been in payroll far too long, as have us all. Take part, obviously, in certain consultation groups, and obviously the key function is training the industry. So we meet thousands of you a year.
Fantastic. And moving from left to right, Mr. Simon Parsons.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be with you. Simon Parsons, Director of UK Compliance Strategies at SD Worx. Been in the industry sometime since the mid-80s, and certainly in software development and consultation. I'm also part of Reward 300.
Fantastic. And Miss Lou Gray.
Lou Gray. I am an Associate Director at Evelyn Partners on a managed payroll service. I'm also on the Board of Directors for CIPP, and I too am on the Reward 300.
And if you can't hear me, because my screen seems to have just gone blank, Andy Nichols.
Hi everyone. Yes, I work for the regulator. My role is to help the payroll industry, particularly payroll professionals, understand automatic enrolment. And just I want to keep you up to date with all things pension. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Well, today's discussion topics, we're going to be talking about the work-life balance, so paternity leave, dependent leave, and flexible working. We're going to be talking about car allowance deductions and class NI. We're going to talk about HMRC and PAYE deadlines and supports, holiday periods and how to manage them as we go into the summer months, the SD Worx Academy, including a holiday masterclass, and there'll be some links to that as well, a pensions update from Andy, and any hot topics in Q&A if we get to it. But before all of that, we're going to launch our first poll today, which is a family-focused payroll policies poll. The question is, how is your organisation adapting payroll and leave policies to accommodate evolving family needs? Now, for those in audio only, the answers or options are currently reviewing policies, enhancing dependent carers or neonatal leave provisions, increasing flexibility in working arrangements, no changes planned at the moment, or other. While waiting for those results, I will ask one of my colleagues to comment on them in just a moment. I'm going to disappear from this chat for a second because my computer seems to have freezed. I'll be back in just one moment, but let's get on with that poll and I'll be back in two.
So whilst Nick's rejoining us, how are we doing with the poll, David? Do we have any results? So they're still voting. There we go. Nick's back. Okay.
I don't know if you can see or hear me, guys. Apologies if
we can.
If you still can. My screen is completely greyed out. I can't see anything, but I can still hear you. Simon, if you can just take over the poll results for a moment, I'm going to try and work out what's going on with my computer, and I will let you know when I can see and hear again.
Yeah, sure. So it looks like we've got 31% say they're currently reviewing policies, 19% say they have enhanced dependent care, neonatal leave provisions, 20% increasing flexibility in working arrangements, 27% no change planned at the moment, and there's a 3% other. So I don't know. Do you want to provide some thoughts there, Richard?
Yeah, I think a lot of what's going on at the moment is still in consultation, which could, I guess, would give the reasons for the changes aren't being considered. But there is certainly going to be, quite a chunk of review going forward. We've had a number of consultations. We've had a couple of government reevaluations, especially around change. So applicably, we're already seeing the paternity leave moved quite far forward already prior to any sort of decisions made. But I think probably the bigger one is going to be shared, and how that's adapted moving forward. And then obviously the new neonatal leave, the carers leave, and obviously the neonatal leave and pay. So I think there's quite a lot out there and quite a lot to happen. I guess it's where people are in respect that we don't have legislative guidance, even though a lot of this has now had royal assent.
And what about Simon? Whenever we look at these figures, I mean, enhanced dependent carers already there, 19%. Increasing flexibility in working arrangement is 20%. And perhaps the no changes are planned because maybe some organisations already have good policies in place, and at the moment they're just waiting to hear what changes. I mean, whenever we look back to the last 3 years in payroll in particular, and for HR as well, employees are wanting benefits. So some of these categories come under benefits, and they could be what they ask their employer to provide for them to enhance them to join another business.
Now, I'm just thinking, if COVID hadn't come along, would it be as advanced, or has that been a driver in people deciding that? Because I'm thinking flexible employment arrangements for family were considered as quite a perk some years ago, probably more for various types of worker, whereas I think COVID thrust us all into a regime of homeschooling, no dependent, well, no care for youngsters, or nursery, etc. And we all had to change our arrangements, work from home in some industries. So I'm thinking increasingly, as you're probably suggesting there, Lou, it's now considered by a larger proportion of the workforce as an expectation of having family-friendly policies in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and I've certainly revisited how I go out and recruit looking for payroll professionals for the team I work in, and because I'm interested in getting the best person for the job, and if that means then agreeing to a work from home contract and allowing team members flexibility, that's important if I want to get the right person. And I'm sure other businesses have had to adapt and change the way that they think, and based on the fact that we have demonstrated so well that we can, for a lot of jobs, work from home successfully.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think there have been two recent parliamentary changes or proposals or things passed that are progressing that will impact us in the payroll application industry and HR. And I'm thinking one of them is the announcement on extension on paternity pay flexibilities. Maybe it's not a major element, and the other is the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act 2023. Do you have anything you can share with us, Richard, on either of those?
The paternity, absolutely. So the principal change that they're looking to bring in, firstly, oh, sorry, doggy, that's not me. Principally looking to expand from the current 1 or 2 weeks consecutively to 1 or 2 weeks separately. But also then obviously the extension of time. So going from what is currently 56 days to, I believe, a year, or the full maternity period. So they're the critical change. I know from what was happening in 2019 that may not be the end of it. There was certainly a view on the payment, because obviously in principle, as the partner, can you afford to take those 2 weeks if your employer only pays you statutory? And the answer is often no, and which would mean therefore that the father or partner would actually take holiday. I know there was a view, or a possible view, of actually increasing paternity pay to possibly the same as higher rate maternity, for instance. So I don't think we're at the end of it. I think what they're trying to do is at the moment just increase flexibility. And if you read the consultation, it's all about, I guess, ensuring the father has more options to be more involved at at the early point of the child's life. So I think that's quite a critical thing and quite a big change in that respect.
We've certainly had a number of our client employers wanting to have implemented more flexible operation of SPP. However, SPP is not flexible to the extent
No.
that I think, as Richard's saying, it has to be taken in a block of 1 or 2 weeks. It can't be taken in a block of 1, come into work for a couple of months and take another. And some employers have probably been of the view that's what they want to do. But at the moment, that's not allowed under the regulations under a statutory payment. If an employer wants to pay it, fine, but you can't claim that back from the government. Whereas this sort of brings in that flexibility. But this is set, I think, from memory, Richard Lou, in April 25, the proposal. So it's not even, so although it's been announced, I think it's a little way off, but I might be wrong there. Unless you can...
I think you're right, because I think it's the same with the neonatal leave and pay, isn't it? It's obviously not going to be that quick, especially with that one, on the grounds that there's quite a lot to think about. Because obviously with neonatal leave and pay, you're suddenly in a world where you're affecting maternity, e.g. maternity pay, maternity leave, which nothing else usually does. But there could be a scenario, for instance, where a lady goes on neonatal leave and pay that actually runs past the EWC. So how's that going to be treated, for instance, and vice versa? They've started their maternity. They've now, are they going to then go to neonatal leave and pay and come back? I think there's quite a lot that sits behind that one in relation to having all the ducks in a row, shall we say, before any guidance could be even considered. So I think there is meat on the bone with that one especially.
Yeah, and I think we've got extensions of, I'll call it anti-redundancy rights. That's probably the wrong label, but certainly redundancy protections for maternity cases, parental leave, extending it beyond the current sort of term.
6 to 8, from 6 months to 18 was the principle in the consultation.
Okay. And then we've had, was it 2 weeks ago today, actually, the Employment Relations Flexible Working Act 2023 passed. That doesn't mean it's effective yet, so that, because I think it's still got to have a royal assent and have secondary legislation put in place. But the principle is, I guess, it's going ahead at a future point. If I cover some of the brief points, I think, of what that means. So the Act introduces the following. So an employer will now be able to make 2 flexible working requests with any 12-month period. The employers will have to deal with the flexible working request within 2 months of receiving them, unless there's a mutually agreed extension. The change is to ensure that requests are handled promptly and employers receive timely response. The employers will no longer be able to refuse the request outright. They will actually have to consult with the employee. However, the Act does not specify any minimum requirement for that consultation process, leaving it open to interpretation by the employers. So it doesn't actually give the individual still a right, but I think it's giving them a right to at least have it considered in a more serious way, other than saying, no way, you're not. I think it's an element of seriousness in that consultation. And equally, the employee no longer has to explain how that flexible working request may impact the employer. I think that now becomes an employer's problem. The employee is just having to explain from their angle, etc. Well, I don't even really have to do that. They just make the request, and the employer has the obligation. Now, sometimes it was explained that this was going to be a day one right, but I don't believe that's the case. I think it opens the window for secondary legislation to be introduced to make it a day one right, but it hasn't brought in a day one right. It's still a 26-week right. I don't know if there's anything more you can comment on their team on the changes.
No, so, I think the day one right was a commitment from the government when this initially started, but as you say, it's not in the final draft, shall we say? Because I think the principal argument is, I was going to say, I think the principal argument, as you said, Simon, it's about the employer being more active around the request rather than possibly just saying no. Because also within it, it states about other types of flexible working should also be considered if the one that's originally being asked for doesn't work. So whether that be job sharing, split shifts, annualized work, whatever it may be. So I think it's all about making it fairer, making it more, I guess, focused for the employer to actually be more constructive. I think is really key about it.
Yeah, Lou, you had some comments to make, I think.
Yeah, the government had said that it would deal with the day one request through separate secondary legislation, and that hasn't been tabled yet. And it achieved royal assent on the 20th of July.
Okay, so that was, yes, a few days after. So yeah, thank you for that. And I think there is no right of appeal requirement, I think, within it, but there's a recommendation within the Act that employers follow the ACAS Code of Practice on flexible working. So I think that's still potentially a voluntary code, but we'll have to see where future leads. And substantive consultation is another area. There is actually no requirement for substantive consultation, but because it doesn't describe what the consultation is, but there is a requirement for consultation. So we'll have to see how this goes. So this is all part of moving forward with the modernisation of current flexible working framework for the future, and we'll see where we go. I think this is becoming increasingly a recruitment vehicle that wins an employer over. So I think the power is a little bit more on the workers' foot following our COVID couple of years.
I mean, definitely in interviewing for positions to come into my payroll team, it definitely is a key factor for the people that I'm interviewing, because they want to have the flexibility. They want to understand what's available to them from our business. And I mean, I suppose ultimately that will be used as a bargaining tool against moving jobs or, you know, going back to an employer.
Yeah, I think it's key. I think, you know, I think the other aspect of this is it's nowhere near done. If you read the evaluation, shared is definitely going to be on the horizon, including a full review of it. Again, going back to 2019, before COVID, work had already started, but then obviously stopped. So principally, it could even mean a complete redevelopment of shared leave and pay. They're talking about within the evaluation going to a more European model, in respect that there's just a pot. So principally the father and the mother could well have X number of weeks of pay and leave to use as they so desire, rather than linking it to the maternity period. So originally I had 13 weeks back in 2019. So basically the father would just get 13 weeks of option, the mother would have 13 weeks of option, and they would just use it accordingly if they desire. And obviously that would massively simplify the process from what currently can be a very long-winded and complex scenario. So I think there's a lot of stuff there as well, which could cause quite significant change in payroll.
That's great. Now, I don't see that we've got any questions in relation to parental leave at the moment, but again, I guess the other angle that I'm thinking traditionally we see and is always open to challenge is, of course, what's going to happen with minimum wage next year and significant rises if there are more again, because inflation has not dropped that much, just a little, and how that hits with the alabaster principle and how people are coping with that. But should we go on to our next topic, which I think is on Well,
Allowance.
car allowance deductions in the two cases. And one aspect I think we didn't cover on our work-life balance is we were kind of commenting to each other before we came on this call, did any of us actually have a work-life balance? Maybe we weren't the best examples. But do you want to tell us a little bit about Lang O'Rourke and the Wilmot-Dixon cases, Richard?
I'd love to. So this is a challenging one, I think it's fair to say. So they actually go back a few years in
12.
relation to the original tribunal, and the circumstances actually go all the way back to 2002, if memory serves correctly. So if you are not aware of this, hang on to your hats, because this is a good one. So principally, there have been previous cases in respect of the reclamation or consideration of tax and national insurance on cars. Where this has now become a much bigger issue is the scenario we have with the two businesses you can see on the slide. So background, both of them are building companies, both of them are substantial, and both of them have thousands of staff. Lang O'Rourke is about 8,000 in the UK. Can't remember off the top of my head, Wilmot. Principally, they have company cars, but they also have a car allowance scheme. The car allowance schemes are fiscally based on grade rather than usage. And looking, sorry, my watch is talking to me, and looking at the case notes with Lang O'Rourke, for instance, at least half the people who receive the car allowance do no business mileage at all. So the schemes are not based on requirement or need. They are not based on the member of staff having to use the car for business, but primarily the schemes were originally for that fact. With Wilmot-Dixon, it's slightly different, where, yes, the car schemes are based, again, on grade level, but principally it was originally also based on usage. But the issue as well with Wilmot is they don't even need to use the allowance to buy a car, but it's there if they need it. So we're looking at a allowance requirement, and it has been taken out for years and years and years. What's actually occurred is that both Lang O'Rourke and Wilmot have made substantial claims against national insurance paid. Lang O'Rourke is well over £2 million, Wilmot well over £1 million of refunded national insurance against the car allowance. Now, many of you who won't know about this case will probably say, well, surely car allowance is remuneration, it's taxable and nickable. And if you'd have asked me, I'd have said absolutely the same, especially given the staff in both businesses are paid for mileage separately. So if they do business mileage, there is a tax and NI-free claimable amount, not necessarily the full advisory, but obviously the employee can claim the tax back on the difference of the two. They both went to initial tribunal and they both lost on the grounds that the tribunal agreed that they were remuneration, and the principle was that therefore it's taxable and nickable. The key scenario, however, in the appeal was that the legislation has other areas that looks at things such as RME, which is relevant motoring expenditure, and qualifying allowances. The argument, and I guess it's not necessarily a loophole, but the flexibility is that the actual legislation, and I think it's 22A, is very polarized and does not give true flexibility around what RME truly is. And therefore, the argument has been that even though these cars were not specifically for it, there could be an interpretation, for instance, that the intention was that they were. And they're using this as their argument to claim the millions of pounds of national insurance back. What's occurred is that the appeal has agreed with them on the back of Rule 22A that there isn't enough meat on the bone, use that phrase again, within the legislation to, I guess, state what that truly means in respect of RME or the qualifying allowance, and therefore, in the view of the appeal, both companies are in their rights to reclaim the national insurance. And this is big stuff, because if you can imagine how many companies have car allowance schemes, how many cars are out there on car allowance schemes, or even employees, it could well mean that pretty much anyone with a scheme that matches or is relevant to these two could have exactly the same right to claim. Now, hold on for the moment, because HMRC has 30 days to appeal, and they will, you'd have thought, on the grounds that this is fairly different. But you can also expect very quickly that Gov and HMRC will more than likely write new legislation. But I guess the issue is the legacy situation that we now have. I think that's about it, Simon.
Super. So I think I'm back now, guys. Apologies. Can you hear me now? Am I good?
Yep.
Yeah, we can hear you, Nick.
I've swapped computers and changed things around. So apologies for thank you, Simon, for holding the fort. So picking up from what Richard's just said, what does that mean going forward, Simon? Anything else you can add?
Well, yeah, well, I'll add another angle, which is the difference between taxation and national insurance. So we know that, and this probably applies to some of us, because some of us actually drive our own cars for business. So we may be in that case of the offset allowance different. So in effect, they're saying if you could get 45p a mile, if you only got 20p a mile, you can get the national insurance relief on 25 pence. That's in effect what we're saying here, isn't it? But we know that for the first 10,000 miles, you only get 45p. Thereafter, you get 25. But the oddity about national insurance law is that the rate is 45p. Regardless, there is no 10,000 mile limit. So that's why it then escalates up. But what it means, I guess, going from now is employers need to decide if they want to make a reclaim if they haven't done, because you're running out of time. So I think, as Richard, as you're saying, assuming that this sticks as is and requires a change in legislation, the past is the past. That's as it is. Legislation will change the future. So there is potentials that businesses could reclaim back these AMAP difference amounts. And some businesses who have lodged a claim will have 12 years of outstanding claim. For other businesses that haven't claimed, you've got more strict limits. So you can only go back, is it potentially 4 years for that reclaim, but even still significant amount. But yes, I think this is going to sort of throw up in the air and revolutionize the thoughts on company car versus private car for business usage, and whether there's NIC reliefs involved, etc.
Perfect. Actually, we've had a couple of questions come in. I don't know how long we've been here, so apologies if you sent these while I was offline. Someone just very quickly asked, may have joined slightly after the introduction, to say, will we receive the recording of the session? The answer is yes, it will come later on in the show. And a question that's slightly unrelated, it says, how should we treat the calculation of NI for late starters? For example, I have an employee who starts on the 19th of June, and this is paid on top of July salary, brackets month one. Our system is HMRC accredited, but does not separate the period payment, so the employee is paying too much NI.
Well, shall I tackle two elements there, if I may? There's no such thing as an HMRC accredited payroll system. So if your payroll system claims it, they're not telling the truth. So there are recognised systems, but the recognised systems purely test an FPS submission between the payroll and HMRC. HMRC don't accredit any payroll system. Now,
I don't know if I knew that.
Yeah, and if you look at CWG2, there's a section on there. I think it's quite late in. I'm going to say number 32 springs into my head. I might be completely wrong. It's just the way my brain works at times.
Notice how none of the panel are going to challenge you. We all just accept it as probably.
Yes, but I may have that wrong. When we look at it, it'll be something completely different, and I'll say, oh yes, but if you do this and multiply by infinity and divide by pi, it comes to 32. Well, she'll actually say you have to split the earnings into the two separate periods. You take the calculation at the point of payment, but it's two periods, the start period and the current period. That's the requirement under CWG2.
Okay, super. And actually a question that related to the ruling we just discussed, comes in from Dagmar. It says, how can we go about claiming the NI back?
Yeah, I'm going to point it that way. Richard, do you got any thoughts?
Sure.
Speak through the EPS, I guess.
Yes. Well, for the NIC, you mean for the car NIC?
Yes.
Yes, for the car NIC, I think you need to write to HMRC. There'll be a standard employer's contact address. Is that a Long Benton? I'm thinking from memory. I might be wrong. It'll be a PO box. They won't open that mail probably for 3 months. But I think the importance is, certainly having seen some of the solicitor's advice, is lodge the claim. It'll sit there, but as I say, some have had outstanding claims for 12 years, but that doesn't expire once you've lodged the claim. I think it stays, it kind of stops time. Otherwise, if you wait, you'll find that your 4-year limit goes back from the point you decide to claim.
I guess the other thing, Simon, is for the employee, usually if you are claiming the difference between, say, 20p and 45p, it's usually just a tax reclaim.
Yes.
Does it therefore mean that the employee can make the NIC claim as well?
Well, that's the fun about this one, isn't it? Because potentially it does, doesn't it? And I think the ruling is not purely about secondary NI, it's about primary NI as well. So potentially us that have had our own cars and using it for mileage and only got back the tax, maybe we could take that basis and say, well, come on, you gave me tax relief for 12,000 miles, difference between what I get and that. Where's my national insurance? 12%.
Because I did for 6 years. 6 years I used to get a much lower rate. So just personally, it's like,
Yes, okay. There'll be 2.5 million claims gone into HMRC by tomorrow as a result of this conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, you've given a 3-month window, Simon. They've got time to respond. It's all good. Well, let's move it along. We've got poll number 2, which interestingly was what crashed in my last system. So hopefully I'll stay with you for this one. We're about to move into the subject of HMRC PAYE deadlines and support. So in advance of that, this is our second poll of today. It relates to, of course, PAYE settlement agreements. And the question is this: how would you describe the experience with PAYE settlement agreements, also known as PSAs? If you're on audio only, the options are very smooth, no issues, somewhat easy or minor difficulties encountered, challenging, I've faced some issues, very difficult, I've had major issues, or not applicable because I haven't used a PSA. While we're waiting for those to come in, what's your perspective on this, Richard? How would you describe your experience with PAYE settlement agreements?
well, my personal experience of PSAs finished when I left JP Morgan in about 2001. I think there's been significant change in how they're done. I think probably the greatest thing that was ever done was removal of the annual requirement. So, it has been eased in respect of a process that once you've done it, it stays until you remove it. I think the complexities have been created over time by obviously the devolution of taxation, meaning that you've obviously got to consider Welsh and Scottish separately. But I think, just the whole way the world has changed has eased them because of the digital world we now live in. But I think
push you on an answer and you're answering the poll, which you're not allowed to do as a panel member, but if you had to pick A, B, C, or D, then
I'm clicking and it's not letting me poll.
You're not allowed to poll. I'm going to put it down as somewhat easy then, based on that response. What about yourself?
We'll go with that one.
Where would you be on this list? What would you be clicking, Simon?
Well, that's difficult, and it depends on the circumstances. Assuming that the business understands the nature of a PSA, I'd hope to click very smooth. But seeing the interactions, these are PAYE settlement arrangements quite often misunderstood, and it's at this point that we find that all the things that various departments have done coming out of the woodwork and thinking, oh yeah, no, I gave a did this or did that. Oh yeah, I gave them some vouchers. I gave them this. I gave them that. Way above the trivial benefit limit sometimes. Or they did some other things. Oh yeah, I gave them a golden boot, cash in the boot type stuff. And then you think, well, yeah, that's a great incentive. Did you think about the tax and national insurance implications? And often, I don't know what Lou sees, but certainly I get a lot of people, oh, just shove it on the PSA. And there's an element of, you can't.
Well, sadly, our audience that we're pushing to make a response, they don't get a chance to put in context either, Simon. So what would your response be?
Yes. Yeah. But I'll say I think it's challenging generally for payroll professionals, predominantly because the businesses often don't understand them. But how is it with the HMRC? That's a different matter as well.
And I would agree with Simon. Challenging and facing some issues. As a bureau business, we're reliant, if a client joins us, for them to have an understanding of what has happened in the past. Not all previous providers are able to share that information. And obviously, some businesses, payroll is separate. So conversations with other teams and benefits that are sorted out, that isn't always, that conversation isn't shared with payroll. So sometimes as a bureau, we first know that a PSA is in place whenever HMRC sends a penalty or asks where payment is in relation to PSAs. But very often in the bureau side, whenever you ask a client about the benefits, about what has to go through, what's counted, what's happened in the past, it's very much they don't know, and it's trying to establish from HMRC with the client's help what they have in place and if that needs change. And then obviously working in a business like Evelyn Partners, then as a payroll bureau, then we have to rely on our tax experts as well to help us. As a bureau, we wouldn't be doing the PSAs, but we would have the information that would be helpful to any team doing it.
Sure. And what about yourself, Andy? We've got two challengings. We've got somewhat easy. Where would you be on this? Well,
the last time I did a PSA was 2007. And
we're not looking for Switzerland, guys. Come on, I'm going to push you for an answer, Andy. Where would you go?
I'm going to go
Not
with
applicable.
It would now be not applicable, yes.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll give you that as an option, so that's okay. But let's have a look at what the audience think. Let's get those results back up and see if the audience agree. So results we've got for those in listen-only mode, we've got very smooth, no issues at 18%, somewhat easy, minor difficulties 21%, challenging, face some issues 20%, it's pretty close between those two, very difficult 3%, and 38% of audience say not applicable. So let me come back to you here, Luke, because you've got a complex bureau payroll yourself. What do you think of those results?
I mean, anybody that's not applicable to, that's excellent, and I'm slightly jealous. But whenever you look at the top three, I mean, they are very close, and I think it really does depend where in the business you sit and what impact. And very often, as a payroll professional, you're impacted by a PSA not being in place or being in place and not having that information. And that's where sometimes the negative can come from, you know. But if you have a system that works and it goes smoothly, I mean, that's amazing, because ultimately, it should be a smooth, straightforward process. But as with everything in life, always expect the unexpected.
Absolutely right. We've got 3% there that said very difficult, major issues. Let's jump into the subject then. Hopefully we can alleviate some of those difficulties you may be having. If there's anything in specific you want our panel to support you with in relation to PSAs, do put it in the questions box. If you're in that part of that 3% you need some help, and I'll ask those questions to our panel. But Simon, I'll come back to yourself. HMRC PAYE deadlines and support, settlement agreements, blended rates and more. If you can give us an overview.
Okay, if I just touch on the deadlines for PSA wise, to apply for one for last tax year, it closed on the 5th of July from memory. So you can't now apply for last tax year, but you've got till 5th of July next year for the current year to think about that. And you have to make your return by the 19th of October, which is one of the elements here. We see today, I've certainly had a couple of pushes, and HMRC have done a nice little video on self-assessment of do it early and things like that. But we found that a number of the helplines closed. So it seems like we've gone through a period where HMRC have said, oh, we've hit the April peak. Why do people apply their self-assessment in April? I know why. I do it myself. It's because HMRC owe me. So I file it in April. Now, if I owe them money, I file it in January. Now, I keep on getting asked that question by HMRC in lots of consultations of why do I do that? And it's sort of in April, I get the money back within 7 days. And in January, the deadline is the same no matter when I file my self-assessment, but you won't change my tax code in current year because it's so late, and so you leave me alone. Whereas some of us, I'm sure thousands of us, millions of us in the UK have probably just had the tax bounce because the P11Ds have been processed this last year. So you'll all have found that a lot of you that you've gone on to week one, month one tax. Why? I don't know, but they've done that because your code's dropped by 5. Why you would need to do that for a code that's dropped so little, don't know, but that's the sort of thing that's going on. So yeah, I don't know if that's the experience, but at the moment the helplines are closed, but they want you to file.
And that's going to link to a poll we've got coming up. So if anyone is having HMRC performance issues, we'll have an opportunity for you to let us know in a poll that's coming up shortly. What's been your experience, Lou? Because I know obviously you've got to manage different deadlines and different client deadlines in particular. What's been your experience?
For PSAs?
Yeah, and for PAYE deadlines and actually your experience with HMRC as well, I think.
Okay, so in relation to PSA, unfortunately, I find in a bureau we can be in the back foot. So as I said before, it's whenever HMRC reaches out to the client or sends us the penalty notice or the notification, where's your payment, that's when we actually discover and then have to make amends and to look at it. In relation to HMRC experience, I don't like to be negative, but at the moment, whenever we are transitioning so many payrolls, it's very hard to get a PAYE number to be able to set up the new payrolls. And we are running at times between 8 and 9 weeks behind actually getting the information. In relation to telephone calls, I mean, obviously, the earlier you ring in the day, that's when you can maybe get somebody. But then we'll run into the problem sometimes, as with all occupations, there's good people to talk to, and then there's the terrible people to talk to. So if you get a terrible person that you don't understand what they're saying, or you don't know the basis, then you have to ring back. So that's wasting more time. And that is a large part of our day, being on the line, waiting for somebody in HMRC to talk to be able to help and guide. And it's very frustrating. And whenever you're running a team of 14, then you're having to remember you're balancing the frustration of the team and what they have to experience. And whenever they got HMRC are very quick to say you've done it wrong, but then whenever you try to fix the problem or try to understand how to fix it, it's getting the correct steps and actions that you need to take. And at the moment, that is a big frustration. Definitely the strike did not help because that's delayed things further in getting resolution to appeals and being able to talk to somebody. But there's no improvement for me personally and for my team at the moment.
It's interesting to hear. Simon, I've got a point here about the impact of the closure of the self-assessment line and options for resolving disputes. So if we know there's HMRC performance issues, what are the options that are available to us?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I could sort of relay an instant. Lou will tell me it's probably been quite a good response, but I phoned 3 o'clock in an afternoon a week Wednesday ago. I listened to the music for 55 minutes. They did answer. They couldn't answer my query, so they took my number and promised they'd call back within 24 hours. So I waited. I waited 48 hours. Then the weekend arrived and I escalated it. Lou will know that and Richard will know that there are some people that we can kind of say, you know, is this normal experience? And I got a call on the 9:25 on the Monday morning. So they actually did deal with my problem, but they said that there was no call logged to call me back. But that wasn't the impression I gave, and I'm sure others here will. A common experience I'm sure we're all seeing is you phone up to register a charge resolution because your account doesn't balance. They tell you it's registered, but actually it's not. And the debt collectors will be around in a month's time with their baseball bats and dogs to seize goods. And then you phone up, and it seems sometimes, I don't know what the issue is, whether that's incentivization to close calls so that they don't have follow-up, because you see that in all sorts of customer service arenas. Is it that it's well, it's sort of when I complain about goods or services because something's gone wrong, you phone up, they seem to always say at the end, can I close the call now? And there's an element of, but you haven't fixed the problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to realise. I mean, sitting in a bureau, I can only speak obviously because that's the experience for the last 6 years. The number of times we have had phone calls into the office or emails, the debt collectors are at our door because we haven't made the correct payments or we've underpaid. And then whenever you intervene, it actually isn't an error that we've or the client have made. It's actually how they've distributed the funds, or they've put it to the wrong company. And I think as well, whenever you're dealing with a bureau and you're dealing with clients all over the world, they don't understand HMRC and what the issues. So you're being labelled perhaps as a bureau or somebody dealing with the HMRC as the incompetent one. So they don't understand that you can't always get the answer, and there has to be a delay of sometimes weeks. And whenever we would reply to clients to manage their expectations, I'm now saying 8 to 10 weeks before we can get a response, in the hope that if we are able to phone 3 times a week, and then every day, that we will get a resolution. But that then impacts us and our business, and people don't necessarily understand across the globe that the issue can be HMRC, and they don't get that because it's a government body.
How about yourself, Richard? You usually, have an opinion on these kinds of things. What's your view? I don't know if you're calling it, but
probably no more than anyone else, because obviously we only hear stories from clients, and they're obviously very similar in that respect. It's always the case of, I've been on the phone for days, I've rung them 4 times to get the right answer rather than the first one. I think it's however the improvements are promised, the anecdotal discussion and evidence is that it hasn't actually for the user. They can give out as many sort of output merits that they like about how well they're doing and how many are being answered, but anecdotally it doesn't seem to have changed in respect to what people are saying.
Let's see what the audience are feeling here, because we've got a small panel of results here. Let's see if this is true for most of our audience with our next poll, which is, how do you rate the HMRC's performance in terms of its services interaction? There may be some of you listening to this where, you know what, it's been absolutely superb, it's exceeded my expectations, I've heard all of these reports, and actually when I've tried, it's been excellent. Maybe it's just been good, it's met your expectations. Maybe fair is the answer, which could be better, or poor and needs significant improvement. I'll be interested to see this. If anyone has had a superb experience, please do put it in the chat or in the questions, so we can be aware of that, so we can give a fair account of what people's experiences have been. But certainly from my side of the fence as a recruiter, dealing with payroll managers on a regular basis, it's definitely similar to the experiences of our panel so far. So I'll be interested to see those results. How about yourself, Andy? I know, again, probably not something you have much interaction with, but what's been your take, or what are you hearing, or what have you heard, or what's your experience been when you have needed to liaise with HMRC?
I had to do it on a personal level about 3 months ago, and I gave up in the end after 50 odd minutes. I thought, I need to go on with my life. But I mean, a digital tax account, our own, we can access. It is a personal, tax issue, which I just resolved it in the end over the web connection, but not good. No, obviously we liaise with HMRC. We have various connections, and they provide RTI data to TPR, etc. So, and obviously that works, and there's service level agreements and all the rest of it. But on a personal front, I think I would be in the poor, need significant improvement.
Well, let's see what our audience have to say then. We've got 4 options here. Let's see what the results have come back with. See if they agree. So for those in audio only, this is quite interesting. So superb is 0%. Good is 2%. So there is someone in our audience here, or a couple of people that have found it met expectations. Fair could be better.
HMRC.
Possibly. Fair could be better, 32%. Maybe it's someone in our audience who got a rebate that was well in excess of what they were expecting. Poor needs significant improvement, 66%. So probably no surprises there. But Lou, what are your thoughts, or what's your commentary on that, on those results?
I mean, we all have times where we've reached out to HMRC and we have had a good experience. So, I mean, there always has been a good employee who's been able to help us. But overall, you know, poor and needs significant improvement is definitely, you know, how everybody on the call feels, and it's definitely how I feel. And I think it's about that important message of HMRC communicating and talking to the people down on the ground who are doing that work day in, day out. Ultimately, I don't have to phone HMRC every day. Thankfully, my team do that for me on my behalf. But I do know that there's a lot of work needed done, especially as we look at automation and we're looking at the dashboard. We want it to be accurate and correct for our clients and for any employer who has to use it.
Sure, I think there's a lesson in there as well, Lou. I know that the National Payroll Week this week is a big focus on advancing the payroll career, and I think the good thing about our panel for showing our audience here is it makes sense to go up the career ladder as quickly as you can, because you can then delegate the calls to one of your team. But I think in the interest of balance of what you've just said, Tracy's commented to say it's very true. It all depends on who you get through to. I've had really good results and really bad results. Keely says, I rated fair because I think we could do better too. I often see payments submitted without the correct tax year, tax month suffix applied to the reference. So I think that's a fair comment. Jessica says, the last time I called, which was back in May, I waited an hour for an answer, then spent an hour on the phone trying to resolve a few issues. And after being passed around, I did resolve one issue, but one is still outstanding 3 month later. I've written to them and we'll see if I get anything back, but I'm not holding my breath. And Tina says, I've been waiting since February for our PAYE to be corrected due to their reallocation of funds, which I think is something one of our panel mentioned earlier, to another account. They replied in June that it was sorted, and it hasn't been. So yeah, I don't know if there is anyone from HLC listening to this, maybe this is good feedback to take on board. But let's move on then, because we're going into the holiday season, and I think it probably therefore makes sense that we talk about how we prepare for it, how we manage payroll during busy shutdowns. And you know, I work in recruitment, so I know this is tough. I know that payroll people are probably the last people in any business to take a holiday, particularly if you're working in a sole payroll environment. It can be very, very difficult. People need to be paid, and it's very hard for payroll professionals to get away. So if you do manage to get away, it's important you prepare in the right way to make sure your employees are still paid accurately and on time. So how do we manage payroll during busy shutdowns? Let's start with yourself, Richard.
Thank you. I guess there's what shutdowns are we talking about? I guess the positive change in the world since COVID around the whole area of having the flexibility, but also obviously the home-based working option makes it, you'd think, quite a lot less of a problem than it would have been previously. Looking at the payroll industry, pre-2020, it was 5 days a week in an office. You only had your computer on your desk, and therefore subsequently the issues grew immensely. Certainly seen obviously during all the strike action, for instance in London, where the impact is far, far less on employers, because on those days you can just work from home. So I think the impact has reduced. I think the key issue, however, is holidays during the summer. number one, ensuring you have, I guess, managed the team accordingly, that you still have the the, the resource to do the work that's required. Secondly, is having enough knowledge within your business of who else is going to be away, because obviously you need the support or you may need information. So I think that whole integration, which we've talked about probably on every call for the last 6 months, about payroll being a bigger voice in the business, and actually ensuring that they're aware of who's there and who's not. You know, when all of a sudden you need 2 signatures to do X and both of them are on holiday for the whole of August, suddenly that can become quite challenging. So I think as a payroll department, it's being very vocal, being very aware, ensuring that you've reviewed all of your processes, not only the ones to get to clicking the button at the end of the month, to be able to manage your process accordingly. But then obviously on the flip side is let's go back to work-life balance, you know, being constructive, but also being very considerate to staff who've probably had a pretty tough couple of years, as to allowing them to be on holiday. So I think it's a real balancing act, but I think it's just that the pre-planning and preparation is very key.
Yeah, I would fully agree. The pre-planning and engaging as stakeholders to let them know that you need a holiday. And one thing we're seeing in the industry at the minute, everyone's talking about rapid transformation and automation making payroll jobs easier. I don't know how about the people listening to this, but from what I'm seeing is payroll professionals are working harder than they've ever worked, and that includes more hours than ever before, whether you're remote or otherwise. And there's a lot of burnout happening, and people need a holiday to rest, recover, recuperate, and come back stronger. So if we don't have that, if businesses don't allow their payroll professionals to go on the holidays that they need, then they're going to end up with burnout, and they're going to end up with more errors, in my opinion, through people being tired and not having a holiday than they will if they don't let them go. But that's a personal view. It's certainly something I'm seeing in the industry. Simon, coming to you, what are some of the other considerations or things perhaps people need to think about?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? And am I qualified to say not working in that sort of area? But I have to say things have changed over these past few years, hasn't it? As a payroll software developer, we would hit our peak from October through May. It would be, almost, I won't say 24 hours, but almost it felt like that. And then suddenly when you went into June through to September, there'd be this lull of virtually nothing. But that's disappeared probably about 15 years ago. So now it seems to be an element of flat out. However, I think we do need to plan. We need to plan for breaks. I'm off for 10 days in a couple of weeks' time. You get good support from your team. But I agree with you, Nick. I think technology has made certain things easy, but that hasn't lightened the load because that's been replaced by other activity, which is positive in some ways, negative in others. So because it gives us a little bit more influence rather than just dealing as a data clerk all the time. We're actually more of a payroll intelligence group that can support a business. I guess the concept of closure, does that occur still? Certainly I knew from going back probably to the late 80s, 90s, we still had local holiday schemes operating. So I can remember certainly in Scotland, the whole town of Cowdenbeath seemed to just close down. Everything just closed for a whole week and everybody went away somewhere. I don't know if that happens traditionally here. I guess going back 100 years, everybody probably skipped down to Kent to pick the hops whilst they did a working holiday. So it is very different and fluid. I think we're more controlled by schools these days because in the old days, you just fill in a form, wouldn't you? Take your kids off in early May when the weather was turning good and you had yourself affordable holiday, whereas these days you end up with a penalty or fine if you do that. So you're now stuck in a window. So everybody, if they've got a family, wants to compete for the same window of leave, and rightly so, to be honest, because they've got young kids to look after, etc. But I think there's an element of plan, and if you've got good team support, then you can plan good coverage. But equally, slow people down. That's certainly something I have to do at times. To say it's very good you needed that capacity. but realise you're now in the holiday period. I guess being a subsidiary of a Belgian company these days, the Belgium culture is they have 3 weeks in August where they go away. It's almost like the whole nation shuts down.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a bit more like the old French culture, which probably doesn't exist anymore, but did certainly in the 60s and 70s, where everybody went to the south to go and pick grapes to an extent. And, you know, Paris was empty, and you used to even get that in Rome, where everybody just headed off. The city centres were closed pretty much in those sorts of peak times. Maybe that's an era that's gone, and maybe I'm showing my age.
How about yourself, Lou? You've obviously got to manage multiple deadlines, multiple clients. How do you work? You know, how do you plan to ensure that all those clients are paid compliantly and on time, and managing all the different deadlines? I know you've got a team to support you, but it must still be tough to manage the rotas if everyone wants to take holiday at the same time.
It is, and we're very fortunate. What we have done is we've set up a annual leave sheet where people are writing when they want to be off and then requesting it. And then we put in place 6 months ago an annual leave policy to make it clear, so that there was a structure and there was consistency for the team, and so that it was first come, first served, and for people to plan and prepare in the lead up to time off, depending on whether it's 1 week or 2. Then it's about talking to clients and making them informed that somebody's going to be on leave and somebody else will pick it up in their absence. And it's all very much about the communication piece. I'm a great believer. This almost touches on the work-life balance. I don't want my team members to work for 3 weeks in 1 week to be able to take 2 weeks off on annual leave. And I feel almost that's the downside. Well, another downside to what way we've worked the last number of years. Being on hand, always having a laptop or else a phone, so that we can always be contacted. I want my team on the day they switch off to annual leave to go on annual leave. And I think that's really important to give that message. Something else that sometimes does impact a bureau is actually from a client perspective. A client goes on holidays and doesn't communicate that they're on leave. So you're chasing input. You know that employees aren't going to get paid and you've got nobody to talk to. Or even worse, the bank button. The client doesn't have the person who's able to log on and hit the button that says, yes, empty this money from the employer account into the employees. And the number of times, you know, over the years where you're frantically ringing across the world to find somebody to be able to give you the data or approve the payroll or actually to pay the employees, it would actually surprise you that that isn't always considered as well.
Yeah, it would be an interesting poll to run. Maybe we should have thought of this before, but how many people, when they do go on holiday, that are listening and watching this, actually do switch off from their mobile phones? And that's the reality. You're entitled to, right? You've earned that annual leave. There's no need for you to log in theory, but actually we find, certainly I do, we find you're switched on regardless. You're connecting with people, you're answering emails, and actually how much of a real break do many of the people on this show and are watching in actually get, even if they manage to get away? And I think it's an interesting question. And well done, Lou, for championing the fact in your team that actually when you're away, you're away. I think that's absolutely the right attitude. It's very difficult for people to do that. So well done. I think that's really good. A couple of comments.
I was going to say, Nick, I think there's another angle to this as well. And that is, as a manager, so I have a large team, you've got to consider work-life balance for these guys too. It's very easy for a busy manager in a busy department who's got phenomenal deadlines and multiple clients to be so worried about fulfilling their process that it clouds their judgment on allowing the staff to take the leave. And I think that's an absolute no-no. I've always been a massive believer in the balance, and unless there is a really hard reason, I'm not going to say no to you. I'll work around it. I'll ensure my clients are aware of this and so on and so forth. And I think that's something that's easily forgotten. But I think going on the back of what Lou said about having to do 3 weeks work in a week to have a week off, it's the other end as well. So I go off for a week and you have heard it a million times. I know I'm coming back to a bloody nightmare, excuse the phrase. I know that I'll have 7,000 emails and 50 jobs that weren't done last week that I'm now going to have to do as well. As a manager, your critical part to this is minimizing and getting rid of that. So putting something in place to ensure that that's not the case either, because you could go on holiday for a week. By 2 weeks after the holiday, you're more tired than before you went.
Yeah,
I
very
think
much.
there's some really key elements on the other side of it for those who are managing, and it's really
I
important.
think also, I don't know if anyone else has felt this on the panel. It happens to me every time, and you can't predict it. Like, I don't feel like I ever get ill when I'm at work. But the minute I get on holiday, I suddenly come down with something, right? I think as your body kind of delays illness that's inside the body, it masks it, you get away, and suddenly you get a cold or you end up with the flu. Honestly, last summer, within 24 hours of going on holiday, I got bronchitis, and I was laid low the whole time, and I came back to work. But I'm personally, I don't know if there's any science in this. I believe it happens.
No, I think your body relaxes, doesn't it, Nick? You know, and you become, your tolerance goes.
You have time to be ill, whereas when you're working, you don't.
No, this is it.
Yes, it gets. But I think we need a cultural shift, don't we? And I think the law's been that way for some time, that the obligation on employer is to plan for the holiday. So you've got to expect that 5.6 weeks statutory leave is taken. Plan it in. So often on social media, I mean, Lou's, I know on the same circles, you'll get people say, well, my employer hasn't paid me for the, 560 hours that they owe me, and I didn't have time because we're busy. And it's sort of plan and take your leave. And the law doesn't allow payment in lieu. So is it just you want more? Do you know what I mean? But it's a balance of deciding we need to plan for the leave to replenish. But even culturally, I think even I would say in HR and payroll, we need to change the way we label things. So quite often I see systems label it as lost time. Why is it lost time? It's not lost at all. It's an obligation to give people holiday leave. You're required to by law. Why is that described in such a negative way? So I think it's sort of, if it was recovery time or refresh time would be better, but why is it lost time?
Yeah, I agree. I think also you mentioned that people often say they haven't had the time, particularly stakeholders that whine about it. I would argue that you always have the time if you have the motivation. And I think that's because it's not an obligation. If you're really motivated to do something, we find the time to do anything we're really motivated to do. So we've got to try and trigger those motivations to make it happen. And a more productive workforce should be that trigger. A refreshed workforce will result in a more happier workforce, more retention, easier to attract staff, more productive. And people need to understand that they're the benefits, really. A couple of things have popped into the box, so I'm going to read those out. One is related back to HMRC. I called them for a personal tax code error. They put the phone down on me. This is an absolutely disgusting way to treat your customer. I am making a complaint. By the way, my tax code still has not been corrected. Sorry to hear about that one, Cal. Interesting. Your comment, Simon, someone said no more minors fortnight. Tina. Someone said, I work for a multi-academy trust with 13 schools. The majority of teams and buildings are closed for the summer. As we grow, we gain more teams working full year, but senior colleagues also need the same breathing space. Payroll and some of HR are now full year. I agree it makes it exceptionally hard for payroll to navigate coverage for items such as BACS approvals when the cycle still needs to function. Absolutely right there, David. And last but not least, and something I mentioned earlier for those working in the sole roles, it says I work alone in payroll and complete all of my work before I get away so I can turn off. It's the only way I can do it. Taking holiday takes a lot of work and a lot of planning. And interestingly, Jessica's just said, I've had a cold this week and I'm on holiday next week. I'm hoping to get the illness out of the way first. Well, I hope you do, Jessica. Fingers crossed. Let's move over to Andy. Any pensions updates we need to be aware of, Andy, to bring the audience up to speed with any changes that are happening in the world of pensions? I think you're on mute.
I had it on mute because the dog was barking, but she has stopped now. Yes, I suppose, yes, a couple of things. One is the pensions dashboard. You might have seen that the pension providers, those with the pension data, need to connect to the dashboard by the 31st of October 26. So all pension providers need to make sure to get their systems in place the data's all correct and all that sort of stuff so that ideally the pension providers will be ready to go live with a dashboard. So they've been given this date, the 31st of October, to connect to the dashboard. And they'll have a staging date given to them, which is a date by which they should connect, but they've got until the 31st of October 2026. So the staging date, a bit like automatic enrollment, will be the date by which we'd like them to connect, but it's in guidance, it's not legislation, and 31st of October 26 is the last day by which they must have their system connected to the dashboard system. In terms of the dashboard going live, that isn't the 31st of October. I mean, it could be possibly, but that'll be down to the Secretary of State to determine when the dashboard will go live. And there's various criteria, such as the dashboard should have the most number of people, pension schemes connected, and it should be safe and everything works properly and all those sort of things. So we just wait for the, I think it's called a dashboard availability point, the live date for the dashboard. So that's all coming up. Watch this space. From payroll perspective, that's more to do with the fact that as pension schemes get nearer to the deadline, they're going to ideally not wait until the deadline. They'll be checking their data, make sure they've got complete sets of data. So you may end up getting requests from pension providers to the employer, and the employer will obviously ask the payroll team, maybe the payroll bureau, for information going back quite a few years potentially, or HR may be impacted. So there's that aspect. Obviously, the 2017 review, where they're looking to reduce the automatic enrollment age down from 22 to 18 and the lower threshold from the current rates down to nil, is being, the bill to do that, the private members bill, is going through Parliament, and it's just had its second reading in the House of Lords. It'll go to committee stage, third reading, then it'll come back to the House of Commons, and they'll look at any changes that have been made, and eventually it will go royal assent and be law. And then at some point DWP will, in conjunction and most likely be following a consultation with us all, will work out when the changes to automatic enrollment age trigger and the lower threshold going to nil will take effect, and how they will take effect. So watch this space as well. So it's all going on in the background. The Mansion House speech, you might have come across that. The minister, thank you, spoke about that, and he mentioned about pensions. So he's talking about pension providers who have lots of money invested in their schemes, to consider investing that money in unlisted organizations, 5%. So there's lots. Have a look at, just Google Mansion House speech, and you'll see about value for money for schemes, VC schemes, collected defined contribution schemes, super funds, and all that sort of stuff, which is all ongoing. And from a payroll perspective, interesting, not significant in terms of it won't affect the operation, apart from value for money, where some pension schemes may be deemed not providing value for money. If they don't change to provide value for money, TPR will close them down, and their members will transfer to a scheme that is providing value for money. So you may end up with one pension scheme operating at the moment, and you end up having to have a new pension scheme in place. So that's probably an update for me and all that.
Thanks,
can I just say one more thing?
Any thought on timing, Andy?
Sorry?
Any thought on timing? We don't know. Is it likely that these changes won't be April 24 and more likely later?
April 24. I believe there's going to be consultation in autumn by DWP. So April 25, I would have thought would be the earliest, but April 26 maybe. Depends what comes out, doesn't it? And how easy it is to do the change. Will it be all in one go? Will they do a phased concept? I don't know.
So do you think rates and contributions thresholds will be frozen again for the third year?
I would have thought so, but that's just my guess. It's a personal view, because obviously TPR can't comment on DWP policy. But why would you increase the threshold only to then knock it back down at some point? But how that knocking back down happens, we just need to see. So please, when the consultation comes out, feed in, because otherwise there'll be a DWP maybe not as well focused on how payroll operates approach to it. Yeah. I did one thing to say, because someone has just come to the door, which I need to go and speak to. So let me do this. The job's working from home. Is we've had a few inspections whereby the employer is putting
we're live environment talking.
The communications letters, and you can send things to a portal, but that isn't given. And you need to make sure the individual accesses that letter on the portal to say that you've given it. So if you've got a self-service approach and you're using the self-service to put letters, AE communications, postponement letters and stuff, if the individual isn't accessing that letter, they haven't been given it, it hasn't been met. We always advise emails or attachment to an email or physically give them the letter. Anyway, I have to go. So I'm sorry.
Well,
I'll have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
Andy, put your dog
Thank you,
on.
Andy. Well, I want to highlight.
Be back in
I want to
September.
highlight some of the SD Worx Academy events we've got coming up. For those that want to find out more about national minimum wage, there's an advanced session coming up on the 15th of September. On the 8th of September, there's another session on pensions and payroll. You can sign up to these at www.sdworx.co.uk/academy. There's actually a special edition webinar on the complex area of holiday pay law, which we've just been discussing, hosted by PQT's very own Simon Parsons, and that's going to take place on Friday, August the 4th. So an opportunity for you guys to sign up to that as well, and there's obviously additional seminars on the back of that one. So if you are interested in signing up to the SD Worx Academy, I recommend you do, and you'll have an expert session with Mr. Simon Parsons to lead you through those sessions. And we have actually had a question come in as well, all the way from Ghana, West Africa. Someone who regularly joins the show has asked the following question. Going to come to you for this one, Richard. I know you're going to have a view on it. With the emergence of AI, will payroll be replaced?
Not yet. Do you want short answers or long answers? Not yet. A clever payroll department will use it to improve and to focus. But obviously, how long's a piece of string? We've all only got a certain amount of time before the robots take over the world. So
I think if I was putting my 6 pence in worth it would be, you know what, payroll people, lots of systems are improving processes, but they're working harder than ever before. So the role might change, but I think the payroll industry on the whole, I'm not finding their roles being replaced. I find they're working harder than ever and getting more involved in more things than they ever have done before. So it may replace elements. I can't ever see it replacing payroll completely. Lou, what's your view on that question?
AI can only but improve our jobs. You know, the menial tasks, the ones that people label us as would touch a button, they can move to automation and free us up to do better value roles and jobs within the payroll team and within a payroll business. To me, we should always be looking for making the improvements and getting them in sooner. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's definitely nothing to be frightened of. We should embrace it so that we can move away from what we've always done it that way. So, I mean, I'm all for automation. The more, the merrier, and allowing people to develop other skills that are needed.
yeah, I'm hearing more and more bureaus, especially really focusing now on robotics in relation to supporting their process, and the number of projects ongoing currently around that whole area is quite impressive.
I mean, I think there's an opportunity here. Maybe AI can't replace payroll, but maybe it can replace the HMRC. We might see some improvements in their service. maybe we're thinking about the question the wrong way around.
Perhaps they could improve this if we all go and robots do it instead.
Well, I think they tried it, but it's got a little bit of work to go, hasn't it? So I've got to say, before I did that call the other week, you know, the thing was try the standard routes. That was the advice I was given. Try the standard routes and see how you get on. So I did the online robotic with my questions to see what happened, and gave up after about 20 minutes before the 3 o'clock. So I started this about 2:40 because it just kept on taking me round in circles. So I kept on getting responses telling me how to claim child benefit, which was interesting because I don't have a child under 16 or in full-time education. And my question had nothing to do with child benefit, but it did. So will it eventually? I think for normality it will help. But I imagine, I don't know about Richard and Lou, but I think they're probably of the view the excitement of payroll is in the nuance things around the edge, which I think AI will have a long way to go before it knows what to do. The other struggle that I find that happens in most AI at the moment is it doesn't understand the concept of timing. So quite often in payroll, we're in a virtual world. So we're not talking about now, we're talking about a future point or a past point, and it struggles. Now, is that because it can't deal with it? And I think the answer is potentially no. I think it's the people who are designing it can't yet deal with it because they don't understand the concept. So quite often it's an element of the knowledge of the people creating it needs to be much stronger than it is.
You know what? I think this show answers the question to a certain degree. Well, we've got the real experts here in the world of payroll, and this payroll question time is very much based around the nuances you talk about. Understanding how something is written, and how it can be applied. It's often not as binary as we think. So I think that's where our eyes in particular is going to struggle, and we're always going to need to be able to contextualize what's in front of us, which is something that robots can't do. So I think, yeah, in agreement with everyone, it's going to replace aspects of the monotonous tasks and the automatous tasks that we can do, but ultimately, no, it's not, in my opinion, for what it's worth, going to replace the world of payroll. So, quick question, quick fire round before we close off today. What are people doing, if anything at all, to celebrate National Payroll Week, which is the 4th to the 8th of September? Lou, are you doing anything with your team, or anything you're planning for National Payroll Week?
I think we're going to have a party in the office. Will be the aim, and obviously CIPP have the National Payroll Week kick-off over in the Sky Garden, and I hope to be attending it.
I sadly can't go. I had to decline my invitation, but I was there last time and it was a fantastic event. So anyone going, definitely take it up and go along. It's a cracking venue and a really good event. We know that, of course, SD Worx are holding a webinar on pensions and payroll. That's on the 8th of September, if you saw that in the SD Worx Academy link. Simon, anything else that you're aware of that may be happening in the world of SD Worx for National Payroll Week?
Well, as I say, I'm a remote home worker, so I don't really appear in the offices that much, especially since COVID came on. They do tend to hold rallies, cake sales, all sorts of things. So there tends to be an element of social, and I don't think we get it enough at the moment because we're all now home workers, but hopefully opportunities of social interaction together to actually remember who each other are and build up those relationships.
Social interaction. Okay.
Well, yeah, I probably get. Well, as Lou said, I'll be down in London on the Monday. I think the CIPP are running a number of events that day as well, which is great. I'm sure some of the others will be holding stuff that week as well. So it's actually going to be a very busy week.
Good. And Richard?
Yeah, so we partner with CIPP, obviously, as part of Payroll Week. So I will also be there on Monday, I suspect, if I'm not somewhere abroad. And principally, we have a number of promotions, but also a number of sessions and items, very similarly, obviously, to CIPP that week, to really engage with the industry. So it's a really important week now, and it's gaining and gaining. I remember the very first one where putting a few balloons up was the game, but that's obviously not the form anymore.
Well, it's been going since 1998. I think the last numbers I heard is we've paid 33 million employees in the UK, and the government collects 376 billion. I think was the last number I saw. So I think it's an industry that we need to celebrate what we do, and I think it's absolutely right that we do that, and it's, as you say, it's gaining momentum. Rachel's asked, how can I sign up to other sessions during September? So I'm not sure if this is to PQT or the Academy. Rachel, if it does, go to sdworx.co.uk/PQT for September. Our next episode will be on the 28th of September. You should see that on the screens in front of you. For the Academy, it's sdworx.co.uk/academy. And if it's related to National Payroll Week, go to the CIPP website. They have a landing page dedicated to National Payroll Week. You have videos of what people did in 2022. You can download a free celebration pack, which you can distribute with your team. And there's recommendations of writing to your local minister, local councils and things as well, so if they can get involved. Definitely loads of information at the CIPP website. Do take a look at that, and you can sign up to some of the webinars and sessions that they're running as well during that same week. There'll be lots going on. So I think LinkedIn will go a bit mad with the hashtags choose payroll and hashtags NPW23. So I look forward to seeing those when I get back from my own holidays, which just leaves me to say a huge thank you today to Richard George, Simon Parsons, Lou Gray, and Annie Nichols, who obviously has had to leave us early. I wish you all a fantastic August. I'm going to be away in France, probably ill, hopefully not. And I look forward to coming back for the next session on the 28th of September. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.